If I could change one thing, I would really like media to lean into the vibrancy and the variety of the community. I think we have made a lot of progress having more diverse stories represented, but even now, some media still kind of pales a little bit compared to the community I see.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tales of Our Times. This is a show where we discuss the stories that move us, what makes them so meaningful, and why others could or should find meaning in them as well. This is not a spoiler-free show, so bear that in mind as you continue to listen. We tackle movies, books, comics, and more. Where there's a story, there's a reason to read. And you're joining us during our June Pride Month special, where I'm inviting members of our colorful LGBTQ plus community from all over the world to come and share stories which made them feel seen and what that means to each. Joining me today is a returning guest, Janet. Welcome back, Janet.
Hi.
Woo! Thank you for coming back. We've had a couple of really good talks on like fantasy in the past. And I feel like today we're going to kind of expand on not exactly fantasy, but not quite realism.
No,
with
not
the book
quite
that
realism.
I'm excited about that. I love that. So just in case, though, if somebody missed one of those previous episodes, is there anything you'd like to say to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Janet. I've been here in Taiwan for almost 3 years now.
Woo!
I have a pretty strong background in things like literature and writing, and I enjoy stories and storytelling a lot as well. And I'm always happy to be here.
So then what book have you brought for us to talk about today?
So the story I'm bringing today is called The Honeys by Ryan La Sala. And it is a young adult horror novel, distinctly leaning a bit in a supernatural direction, with a main character who is gender fluid. For people who are maybe not as familiar with the term, it's a person who does not super strongly align with only one gender.
The way that I heard it, as you said, is like some people live in like a fixed place somewhere in the middle, and other people kind of change their expression throughout their lives, maybe even day by day. Does that sort of like align with like how you understand it too?
Yes, and also that's actually very interesting because that does come up a bit in the book.
Well. So if you guys have questions, this is a great book for you, as long as you're not afraid of horror. But maybe give it a shot. That's one of my favorite genres.
And I am not typically as much of a horror person, but the book was like still very
good enough to like carry you through.
Enjoyable. I will say this is maybe a book that, content warning, it involves things like bees, and so there's a bit of body horror, and there's also bugs. So
yeah, two things I do hate, but I would read a horror novel about.
But yeah, and so if you're super squeamish about that, that's your heads up.
Yeah. In addition to the fact that this is a horror novel, is there anything else that you think that we should like bring up or know about the book before we get into it? We kind of covered bees, horror, body horror.
There is some death. So the story revolves around a set of twins, a twin sister and her sibling Mars, who was born as a boy but is gender fluid and never really kind of fits super comfortably into one box all the time. And this has led to different conflicts with like family, with school, with how you're kind of able to move through the world.
And moving through like different levels of acceptance as well.
Yeah.
I think this is a great place then.
Yeah.
Janet, can you give us a summary of The Honeys?
So the story starts when Mars, our main character, has decided not to go back to summer camp for the summer due to kind of like an incident, just kind of like an argument that came up over gender and presentation, some bullying from other campers in a previous year.
Yeah.
And so they decide to stay home while their twin sister goes on to summer camp. Midway through the summer, Mars is woken up in the middle of the night by their sister, clearly not in her right mind, attempting to murder them.
Okay, I've misunderstood you telling me the premise of the book. I thought somebody was breaking in to murder Mars and their sister. This was the twin sister breaking in an attempt to murder Mars.
But again, clearly not quite in her right
Not as
mind.
He knows her.
Yeah.
They, gender fluid, so they, them pronouns.
They, them pronouns,
yes,
for the sake of radio ease, I think.
Yeah,
but
so not as Mars knows their sister.
Yeah. And in the kind of scuffle, the chase through their house, she falls from a second story and passes and dies, right?
Okay.
Very early in the story. And so Mars is kind of left with this offer to go back to the summer camp where she had been to kind of try and get closure.
It's sort of like the horror novel's response to the call to adventure for like the hero's journey.
Yeah.
The horror novel has like, do you want to walk the path? Like, do you want to try to learn the answers about what happened? Go to the same cursed place.
Yeah, it's very much that, because Mars has realized it was certainly quite weird. And of course, the parents are kind of like covering it up.
How do you explain that, right?
Yeah, and like kind of like it was a weird tragic accident, like just kind of shoving it under the rug. So Mars decides to go back to this summer camp to try and kind of solve this mystery of what had happened to their sister. That's kind of where the supernatural and the strangeness of it all start to kind of come into play. That's also where the examination of gender kind of starts to be very obvious, because summer camps are relatively gendered spaces due to things like sleeping arrangements, things like that. And a lot of times summer camps will also play up like boys versus girls a lot.
I was just thinking that. I was like, also you have the easy teen division, because it's just shorthand, but not if you don't fit into one of those categories easily.
Yeah. And so it's this situation where Mars is on the one hand navigating romantic interests, like being interested in boys, kind of being obviously put in a boys' cabin.
Because they're presenting as male.
Yeah. Well,
do they have the option? I don't think so.
They don't. They're at the very least they're having to go by like, what were you born as? What's the situation?
Okay. Yeah.
Regardless of whether or not that quote unquote all boy environment is like emotionally or physically safe for them, for example.
Yeah, that obviously wasn't taken into consideration.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. And so what exactly do you do in this situation? But there's obviously the mystery and the cabin that Mars's sister had been staying in.
The all-girl space.
The all-girl space.
Mars would now need access to.
That is a place called Cabin H.
H like honey?
H, yes. H
okay,
like
got
honey.
it.
Which is kind of set aside from the rest of the summer camp. The girls there are all very, very close. They're a very insular, almost clique-like group. And they're into beekeeping. So Mars, during their time at the summer camp, obviously strange things start happening, like things start kind of going on with memory, people's interpretations. Something's a little weird with the trees, something's definitely a little bit weird with the bees and the honey. But Mars also is able to fit in socially very, very comfortably with the other girls in Cabin H, and is kind of able to become an insider. Their identity allows them to be accepted and welcomed into the group by the decision of the other girls. I think that's really important to say, because there's a lot of rhetoric around people like invading each other's spaces, and this idea of this kind of like malicious conquest of these more gender divided spaces, when in fact what often goes on in reality, and I think the book does a very good job showing, is that if you are fitting into that space, fitting into that dynamic, you're usually welcomed in.
It's not an external coming in, it's an internal welcoming.
Yes. So as Mars is kind of starting to explore the connections between the forest, the bees, the history of this place, and the social weaving that's going on, the connection obviously starts going deeper.
Way deeper than beekeeping.
Way deeper than beekeeping. It almost starts to be like this group of girls have a social dynamic that mimics a beehive's, but also in this ability to like reject a queen.
And then this knowledge helps Mars to solve what had happened to their sister.
Yes.
I'm going to assume.
Yeah, that's kind of the direction we go in.
And I'm going to assume that the book ends with Mars solving what happened? Okay.
Mars is able to figure out the wild web of conspiracy of what is going on.
Ooh, fun.
And is able to use their sense of understanding and their identity to navigate to a place of power and security from what had been a horrific environment, I think is the best way to sum that up.
Yeah, without getting into the weeds of
without getting into this magic supernatural beekeeping logic.
the magic beekeeping lore. So then let's move on to discussion about the book, because I think we kind of started to get into it sort of in the middle of the summary there. What about this book, The Honeys? Because it's actually very recent. It's only from 2022. Made you feel seen in a way that wasn't represented in other pieces of media?
A little bit of it is just that it is such a unique premise and exploration just on concept. And I think the fact that it uses identity as both an integral part of solving its story and as this kind of the way that in different books, genre depending, a good protagonist is often the one where like they're the only person kind of equipped to solve a certain problem. And I think because Mars can kind of operate between the gender binary, see things from both perspectives, or I guess both like traditional perspectives, Mars is able to look at this problem from more points of view and is able to kind of solve things in that way.
Kind of from a more holistic view, I would guess. Because it's both. It's like getting a view into these two pretty like purposefully insular worlds, but from a view that is explicitly neither one.
There's a really cool section of the book where Mars gets in trouble for having been out canoeing on the lake because they were traveling between the main part of camp and then over to Cabin H where the honeys are.
Yeah.
And there's this conversation that gets pulled into the territory of metaphor about I'm always kind of drifting in the middle, and sometimes I am on one shore and then sometimes I'm on the other, but I always feel that pull back to drifting again.
Ooh.
Which is like such a beautiful way to describe that kind of sense of things. But I think it's also like a very gentle and a very compassionate way to describe a feeling or a sense like that. That's very difficult, I think, for people who have not really experienced to latch onto.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I think it's one of those things where if it's not how you feel, it's very hard to get a sense of what that embodies for another person.
Especially because, and it's also really interesting that this book uses bees as the other metaphor of like gender as direct power dynamic, because in insects we see this all the time, and using it as like the summer camp metaphor, so many people are born with the innate identification with their gender and like the body that they exist in, that it takes a lot of, I think, kind of mental gymnastics to try to put yourself into the shoes of not even somebody who like wants the opposite, because I think that's actually easier than to imagine somebody or to try to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who doesn't feel strongly attached to either one or whose identity drifts. So I think this is a realm where perhaps maybe poetry does a better job than actually trying to describe it physically.
Yeah, definitely that. And I think also this is another way that this book kind of connects to broader experience and more personal experience. When you realize about yourself that you're not like what you've been told normal is, it pushes this like existential question about how you do relate to gender. And this is both like sexual orientation and gender orientation. When you realize that you're going to be deviating, like there's something about yourself or your identity that is like non-negotiably going to be
separate from that, it gives you this really beautiful opportunity to start examining what you want your relationship to gender and to choice and to expectation to be. Because if you were in a like same gendered or same sex partnership, all of these things about the boy does this and the girl does this
you've got to renegotiate, or like none of the chores in your household get done and no one has any money, right? Like
there's always laundry and we have to buy new clothes at this point.
Yeah, you can't default into that easy path anymore. Not to say that like you can't take the parts you like and leave the parts you don't like. Everybody will renegotiate that a little differently. But it is a book like this that kind of presses up against those hard boundaries, really kind of asks a lot of questions about like, how do you relate to your identity? What are you choosing to include versus what is just kind of a social pressure? Because you don't have to be LGBTQ to examine that.
It invites an examination whether or not you feel like you belong in the majority or in a separate minority, if you even want to use the words majority or minority, right? Like a book like this sort of invites that. I also think, like, to bring it back to the bees, the horror in this being that as humans with a society that we are constantly negotiating all the time, not one that's like inborn, no matter what evil bio people will say, then we have the power to change these. And then to what degree do we want to maintain or change these rules or boundaries or like roles that we've set out for ourselves? Do you think that that's what makes us a tale of our time, or is there something else to it as well that we've missed out?
I think it is what makes it a tale of our time. I think that conversations just in my lifetime, like growing up around presentation and gender and how that affects your path through life have gone so many different directions over the years. And I think it's a thing that a lot of people are wrestling with in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree.
And like, I think that it's very interesting because how you do or don't show up to that conversation and like what you do or don't take from it affects so many things about your life. You know, because obviously there are certain like aspects of gender, how you relate to it, what parts you do or don't choose to do something more traditional with versus not, affect lots and lots of things in your life.
Yeah. Down to like, what do you wear? How do you think? How do you behave? How do you feel about the way that you behave? Like it goes into like so quickly into a deeper meta level and in every single relationship that you hold with every other person, right? Like it's such a deep question that a lot of people, I think, don't even see it as a question. You're told the answer and it's easier to just sort of live with the reality presented to you, regardless of whether or not that's a universal truth or just sort of like a widely accepted easy way to do things.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting conversation.
It's there's a reason the summary on this is long. There's a reason the summary of this was not complete. And there's a reason you should read the book because it's so interesting to explore and to explore Mars's perspective and to also kind of measure it up against your own understanding of gender, wherever you're at with that as well.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. But if you could give the Honeys a one-phrase subtitle of your very own, what would that be? Tough question for a book that we had to decide we couldn't finish the summary of because there was so much.
Drifting Between Two Shores.
Drifting Between Two Shores. That's beautiful. Thanks, Janet.
Thank you for having me.
Well, unfortunately, we are now fully out of time. But thank you so much for joining me today and telling me about this. If there was one message that we could give to the listeners today, I think that it would be to read this book because so many of the things that we wanted to get into that we discussed in the back end, we don't have time for. We didn't get into discussing masculinity. There's this whole bee thing that we had to just kind of glance off of. There's just a lot encompassed in this book.
It's a book you can really dig deeper with. It's such a good invitation to explore.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Janet. And thank you to all of you listeners out there. This has been Tales of Our Time on Radio Taiwan International. I was your host, Amanda Stevens, with today's guest, Janet. You joined us during our Pride Month special. We have one more beautiful episode left. But today, we spent our time discussing the book, The Honeys, Drifting Between Two Shores. A tale of our time. We'll see you next time.